All right, you made it. Well, welcome to this installment of Zen in the Martial Arts. This installment is going to cover a chapter in here or a story in here called Make a Friend of Fear. Make a Friend of Fear. Picture of a shadow there, probably a big shadow. It was only a bare foot, but I was unable to keep it from landing someplace on my body. My breath was labored, and my arms and legs felt like lead weights. Every time I moved, that foot seemed to find an opportunity to land with sufficient force to knock the breath out of me. If I were not careful, it might easily dislocate or even fracture my jaw. My opponent had hands too, but it was the feet I was most afraid of. When the match was over, I was completely exhausted. My mouth was dry and I was perspiring profusely. Master Han, who had been watching the kumite, called to me. I went to him, bowed, and stood silently awaiting his comment. You cannot run away from fear in the dojo, he said. In fact, it is a perfect place in which to learn to face fear. Most of the time, we generate our own fears, and this is especially true when we confront an unfamiliar situation that shatters confidence. And this is what happened to you today. Suddenly, without warning, his foot swept up from the floor toward my head. Without thinking, my hands flew up in a guard position, and I took a huge step backward out of range. Don't move, he commanded. I'm not going to hit you. Again, the foot snapped up, stopping just a whisker's breadth from the right side of my jaw, then speedily reappearing at my left side. I heard the snapping sound of his gi as his foot grazed the tip of my nose. I was trembling, but I had not moved. Good, he said. Remain still and composed, secure in the fact that you are in no danger. I did as ordered. For the next few moments, I heard only the snapping of his gi as his foot whipped around my body, always stopping short of making direct contact. You must develop confidence to handle fear, he said. I will have a student practice kicking at you every day that you come in, with instructions that they are never to make contact. Until your fear of being kicked becomes familiar and you develop confidence, stand still and do not react. In time, you will no longer be afraid. This I will promise you. He bowed to me, signifying the end of the lesson. Later, when I had changed into street clothes and I was about to leave, Master Han beckoned me to enter his office. I have a story to tell you, he said. When I was a boy growing up in Korea, I was terrified of the ferocious tigers that lived there. During my early stages of my martial arts training, my master, who knew of my fear, told me that while meditating, I should visualize myself battling a tiger. In the beginning, the tiger always defeated me. Then I began to go to the zoo in Seoul and study the tigers there, familiarizing myself with their habits and their movements. In time, I realized that although the tiger was fearsome indeed, the tiger did have weaknesses. It did not have complete mobility of its jaw, relied strongly on its hind legs for tearing the opponent. I began to work out strategies for my imaginary bouts with the tiger to find ways of exploiting the weaknesses. Soon, occasionally, I began to win a skirmish, and my fear of tigers began to disappear. Master Han smiled and gestured towards the wall of his office. He said, now you see the walls here are covered with pictures of tigers. When I am alone, I study one of the pictures and I imagine myself in conflict with the animal. Sometimes I win and sometimes I lose, but I am no longer afraid because they are now familiar to me. In the heat of combat, I am calm, which is as it should be because I have discovered that fear is shadow and not substance. You know, it took me many weeks of constantly facing kicks of Master Han's students before I realized that when I was afraid, I was usually frightening myself, and that my own fears were only one aspect of a situation which could just as well be viewed without any fear or trepidation. When I accepted the fact that I was frightening myself, I became all of a sudden less frightened. My lack of self-confidence had caused the problem. Having overcome some of my fears, I know now that it is better to face a fearful situation than to ignore it, to accept the fact that it's all right to be fearful. For example, I once put off an emotional confrontation that I feared. When I realized the confrontation was inevitable, I began to visualize the forms it could take. I began to face and analyze my fears. What was the worst that could be said, and how might I react? By visualizing the possibilities over a period of time, I reduced my fears to their proper proportions. I was finally ready for the encounter. Of course, it turned out to be far less difficult than I had originally feared. There's a great line in this. It says that I discovered that fear is shadow, not substance. Those are Master Han's words. So I ask you, what fears do you have? They're mere shadows. Because if you think about your history and you think about fears that you have faced, you realize fear is there, but also confidence can be created. Look, a lot of people think you got to start with confidence, and I disagree with that. A lot of people think that, oh, yes, you can't start with confidence. Confidence is a result. Confidence is an outcome. Confidence is the result and the outcome of you facing your fears and then becoming successful because and in spite of the fear. It's not about getting rid of it. So I want to ask you to spend some time visualizing the things that you're afraid of, just like Master Han with the tigers, right? Give them a reality and start to face those fears. Start to do your best to be creating that idea of how you're going to face the fear, and you're going to realize that fear is a lot self-induced. I'm not an expert on fear. I'm not an expert on confidence, but what I can tell you is all the confidence that I have has come as a result of facing the things I was most fearful for. So I'm asking you, if you want to possess confidence in something right now that maybe you're fearful for, pull apart that fear. Do you think that visualizing it and looking through it and rehearsing in your head might help give you some confidence from the success you'll achieve? All right, from Mr. Johnson's Garden, thanks for tuning in. This is Zen and the Martial Arts. Mr. Johnson's out. I'll see you in training soon.